attempt to look into the ground and tell us what's going on below the surface. They attempt to allow us to look through the ground surface here to understand what's going on. And we have many different techniques. You might remember this from last time. There's ground penetrating radar. They come in many different shapes and sizes, and these are already 10 years ago. This is already different from what I'm using today. We have magnetic techniques. There's a couple of different sort of iterations of that here. There's electrical methods, but they're all non-invasive. Some of them are passive. They're not even emitting or sending anything out. Some are active, so they are actually sending either an electrical current or sending electromagnetic waves into the ground. But essentially, they're non-invasive in that there's no digging involved. There's no removal of soil, and that, of course, is great because being non-invasive, we can take these anywhere and look through impervious materials like concrete or asphalt, or we can go on just over grass, but in places that are sensitive where we're not maybe allowed or not comfortable with disturbing the ground surface. But that means we're not actually looking at what's under the surface. We're looking at these geophysical anomalies. So we kind of have a limitation there on how far we can go with them. They're all, as I say, geophysical methods. They're all measuring a physical property, and we're getting anomalies. So I use these terms sort of interchangeably about anomalies. In archaeology, we talk about looking for buried features, and that can be pits, foundations, burials, what have you. But from a geophysical perspective, all I'm ever seeing are anomalies. So I'm making measurements on the surface and looking to see where those anomalies change. They might change because of natural variations. They could change because of soil type, geology, tree roots, animal burrows. What we're hoping is we're going to see cultural, so human affected changes. So someone has dug a hole and put something in the ground or taken something from the ground or whatever. There's some disturbance that has happened that's not natural. But the challenge is, of course, trying to distinguish those. How do we identify natural and cultural anomalies? How do we distinguish those from each other and interpret them and figure out what is causing what? And that's the key part. The data collection is relatively simple. You're basically going up and down very regularly, taking very consistent, carefully spaced, regular, sort of high resolution of readings. You download the data, you display it in some way, and then comes the challenge of making sense of all the data, the analysis. You'll see some data today, and you'll hopefully see some of the complexity of it, and I'll try and talk you through what it means. But the challenge is, and as I often sort of joke with archaeologists, I don't detect archaeological features. I don't detect cultural remains. I'm measuring these geophysical anomalies that I have to interpret. And sometimes I might be able to, be precise about what it is, and other times I'll have a long list of, well, these are all the things that could be. Ultimately, you would have to dig to know, but this is the best we can do without actually getting a spade out, a shovel out, and starting to disturb the ground. So this was the GPR that we used out at the Flatbush African Burial Ground. It's a little different to those others. It's one of the more recent ones that's available. It's primarily aimed at utility mapping, but in archaeology, we adapt and borrow and take all of these technologies to use for archaeological work. And this one turns out to be really good in a lot of different situations for a whole range of archaeological features, including burials. Now, we don't see bones. We don't see artifacts. So people often say, have I found the gold or I found the treasure, or dinosaurs comes up more often than not. We never see small things like bones. Even collecting a very high resolution of data, we're never collecting such a high resolution that we could distinguish like a piece of pottery or a coin or even something larger like a bone. What we're seeing when it comes to burials are often the disturbance that's caused by digging the hole, the grave shaft, that then a coffin, a casket, or maybe just a shroud burial is placed in. And then that soil goes back into the hole, and it doesn't go back in exactly as it came out. It's going to be inverted, it's going to be looser. So there may be a void, there may be a little airspace that's been left by a casket. There may be some coffin hardware or furniture, it's sometimes called, the grips, the handles on the side, but even those would be very hard to see with something like radar. There may be the coffin itself, we might see some of the wood, but we're not going to see bones. It's really, like I say, the disturbance of the grave shaft, a void, an airspace from the coffin itself, maybe the base of the grave shaft where it's going from the loose fill to then the hard sort of natural subsoil. Um, but a lot of those things that we are seeing can also overlap with lots of other types of cultural feature. It could be from utility trenches, excavation for foundations, buildings, a whole manner of other things, which we'll probably get into as we go across. And GPR data look like this as we go. If I jump back here, you can see we've got these tapes on the ground. We walk along these very straight lines. I put out these very regular rows on a grid. And each of those lines corresponds, say, to this sort of black line at the top. You see the 10, 20, 30. These are in meters. I tend to work in metric. As we push that radar, we're getting a slice, a profile through the ground. And this is an example here. This is actually from a different site, but it's just one I've used because it shows many different types of reflection that we'll get. The radar is emitting electromagnetic energy, pulses of energy that go into the ground, and they bounce back anytime there's a change in the material in the ground. So that can be from loose soil to more compact soil, can be soil to rock, soil to an airspace, soil to metal, wet soil to dry soil, or dry soil to wet soil, different types of soil. Um, anytime that energy is traveling through one medium, one soil type or one material, and then changes because it's going to a different soil, you get a reflection back. And that's really what we see in these profiles. We get reflections anytime there's something different. So over here on the left, you can maybe see sort of three different, hopefully you're seeing my cursor here, three different reflections. These could all be burials. They could all be parts of a foundation. They could all be pipes. Uh, when you just see one profile like this, it can be very difficult to distinguish what they are. Over here in the middle, we've got a stronger reflection closer to the surface. This could be something like an area of compaction, a path or a roadway. And then over here on the right, we've got a broader area of reflection that goes down. This looks like a sort of a classic reflection over a hole that's been cut into the ground and then backfilled with something that's different. It could be the same soil, but it's different because it's now looser. It could be construction material that's been dumped in there, any other material. So I would interpret something like this just in one profile as maybe something like a cellar hole, but it could be many different types of, many reasons people dig a hole and put material in it. So this is just one of those profiles as we go, and you can see the challenges of identifying what these are just in one slice. But we collect a lot of these. You see, we had a lot of these tapes on the ground. We're walking up and down, and in fact, out at the burial ground here, at least this open area, we were walking up one tape. We were walking right down next to it, just 10 inches across, 25 centimeters. Then we're walking up the middle, which was 50 centimeters. That's what, 20 inches. Then another 10 inches across. 10 inches again. So this is a very high resolution. As we're pushing this, we're actually taking a reading what each vertical sample is just about every inch. So this is very high resolution stuff, collecting a lot of data to give us as much detail, as much information as we can about what's going on underground. We maybe don't need that much information, but the more we get, the better my interpretation may be, the better I might be able to distinguish between some of those different causes. This gives me an opportunity, since I see a few people in this picture here, to say thanks to everybody who was out there. I can't believe it was last October. That's
Yes,
it's a
yes.
long time. And we had a lot of folks over those couple of days. And I think everybody that wanted to got a chance to push the radar up and down to see what's going on. And as you go, you do see that profile build up. And that is kind of fun compared to some of the other techniques where you just maybe get a number. You don't really have any visual appreciation of what you're seeing. But with the radar, as complex as it is, as you're going along, you can see some of these reflections. And as you come down the next line, you try to remember, oh, I saw something on that last one here. Do I see it again? And that's already then a way to see, okay, what is the horizontal extent of those anomalies? Because it's one thing to see it in profile, but well, how does it look in plan? How far does it extend? Can we distinguish them between, say, pipes or foundations or burials that are all going to look different in plan, even though they may look very similar in profile? So by collecting a lot of those profiles, let's say this is every 10 inches, every 25 centimeters, I then download those. I've carefully recorded the start and stop position, the coordinates, or we actually did a little bit of the area outside of that park using GPS. I then get a 3D block of data, and then I can slice that horizontally. And that's what this image down the bottom here is trying to show. That's just one slice composed of all of those profiles. This is now one horizontal map of all those changes. And they are a lot easier to recognize patterns, relationships. I think our eyes just much, much more used to seeing things in plan form as a map. And that's what I'm going to show you today. I think the profiles can be very complicated. I suddenly used the two data sets. It's all coming from one data set, but I used both the profiles and what we call these time slices, these horizontal maps for when I'm making these interpretations. But I certainly see a lot more when I'm looking at these horizontal maps. We call them time slices because we're sending these pulses of energy into the ground, and they travel through the ground and then they bounce back. It's all basically to do with time. How long does it take to bounce back? The closer stuff comes back much more quickly. If it takes longer to go down and then come back, it's deeper. It's a longer time. I convert from time to depth as best I can to provide you with an interpretation that's in depth. But when the radar's collecting it, it's all basically to do with time. I mean, we're so far removed from archaeology or burials or whatever when we're collecting the data. And part of my job is to make this all sensible, comprehensible, and sort of to go through that interpretation and try and sort of provide you with something that makes sense. So hopefully that's what this will do. I provided a technical report, and these images now come from this report, but this is a good opportunity to sort of talk you through it, hopefully make it a little less jargon heavy, but we've got plenty of time for questions to go over any of this, and answer whatever questions or whatever confusion I've sowed in the next 20 minutes of looking at some of these images. So this is our site. This is where we're looking at the park. I know it's referred to in many of the reports I've seen as the Church Bedford site here because we're at the intersection of Church Avenue and Bedford Avenue. I looked at this entire area inside here. We went out as far west as that large tree. In part, we know there's other disturbance here. I'll show you some of that in a moment. We also went outside as well because there's a lot of indications that the original burial ground extended beyond this and maybe didn't extend too far into the site. I'm getting ahead of myself there. So I was even running across the crosswalk here with the radar using the GPS every time the lights change, taking advantage of that. It's a very busy intersection, as you will all know. So it wasn't particularly easy. That's why I couldn't really do this or this area here or in the middle. It would have been great to have done more of this area here. Those of you that are out there that might remember, we collected the data north-south pretty much, and that was deliberate. It's usual and my expectation certainly for this cemetery for burials to be aligned east-west or close to east-west. And I wanted to get as many passes with the GPR across each burial as possible. So rather than going east-west and maybe only having one or two of those profiles crossing a burial, by going perpendicular to each burial, that should give us multiple passes across each one, and again increases that likelihood of picking it up, detecting it, and then ultimately me identifying it and interpreting it. So out here we did the same thing. This continued that north-south orientation. So one thing I started to do before we collected data, but I continued afterwards, was to really dive into the existing information we know about this site, the existing maps, the previous archaeological work. Many of you are probably familiar with this map that shows the burying ground here. This is from 1855. This, I believe, was drawn after the cemetery had actually closed, I think, to new inhumations, to new burials. We don't know if this is the full extent. This is certainly where it was marked at that time. It may have extended further. I think there's indications and suggestions that it extended this way, but certainly this map gives us a good indication that there was clearly a burial ground at this, what is now an intersection, but you'll see in this map, it wasn't at that time. And in fact, Church Avenue has changed. Bedford was not there at that time. There've been many changes. So I went through the sequence of maps that follow this to see how these have changed and the implications then both on the burial ground, but also on for my interest, how is this going to affect the ground penetrating radar survey itself? And trying to georeference, so that's taking an existing map and overlay it onto modern features is very difficult because obviously on this map almost nothing survives. There's this sort of property line here that just about continues, but I had to use all the later maps. So basically, I'm showing you this in reverse order of what I did. I had to georeference later maps going back in time until I got to something that showed enough features like intersections of sort of these property boundaries and the road to try and get this. Now, I think at least two other people have made an attempt to georeference this 1855 map as well. We've all pretty much come up with the same map that may be off by a few feet here or there, but we've all got the same general kind of consensus that it was in this area here, really across Bedford, and with potentially only a small corner, at least of what was shown in 1855, overlapping with the park here. But as I say, it was every expectation that this burial ground could have been larger. It could have extended south. It could have extended west from what was shown in 1855. So moving forward in time, this is one of the maps that helped me to georeference that one. This is from 1873. No map is shown, but by this stage, you can see we've got a street here coming up to join Church. I think this is Locust Street, as it was called then. It was later renamed Bedford. And by 1873, we've got the first school building, school number 1 in Flatbush in Brooklyn. It's the town of Flatbush, school number 1. That was out here. This is actually just outside our site. Our green dash line here is showing the modern chain link fence. And then there's another iron fence, the wrought iron fence that runs around the outside. But by this stage, no mention of the burial ground. But you can see, well, if the burial ground extended further west, there was a school here. And by 1890, not long after that, that school has gone, and then there's now another much larger school building over this portion of the site, still showing the survey area we're able to look at here. So it's showing this big school within the grass park as it is today, and this is also showing other buildings, various houses. I think some of them are on here as well, some of these houses. This is the Van Dyke building, I'll probably mention again. There's other houses out here. This may be that same building, or maybe a later construction of that house, and other houses coming down here. So yes, it's Locust Street. Church Avenue is still on that original earlier alignment. It's not straight. It's got this sort of slight diagonal alignment coming down here. The larger school, so that's 1890. 1905, the school has expanded, now filling up an even bigger portion of our park here. This map also shows other structures. This particular one doesn't show this side of what is now Bedford Avenue. I think Bedford Avenue and Church Avenue. Church Avenue has now got this new alignment. I'll jump between the two, and you can see how that's cut back now. So the sidewalk now goes across that first school building. This is also showing a 6-inch here and an 8-inch pipe. I think these are sewage pipes that have probably gone in. Could be water pipes. So they're showing a lot of use of this spot after the 19th century for schools, road realignments, and I used all of those maps together to put together this really disheartening map of all the potential disturbance. And this is all subsurface disturbance. So all these structures that we can expect have cut into the ground and actually disturb the ground. So I guess the former road isn't necessarily a disturbance if that was just on the surface, but under roads we're going to have utilities, and these are just the big utilities that were shown on those earlier maps. There's going to be, if this was just the sewage, there's going to be water, there's going to be electric, there's going to be all kinds of other subsurface disturbances out here. This showing the 1855 approximate location of the burial ground as it was known then, but you can see there's been a lot of disturbance out there. What I've shown in numbers, and this is also shown in the report, these are all from the report. These are all the approximate locations of finds of human remains out there. So number one, when this first school was put in that I think had a basement that was dug out, it was noted, I think, in a newspaper article that some human remains were found there. So that's, I think, part of our understanding of why we expected this cemetery, this burial ground, extended west from where it was shown in 1855. Number two, I think, was when this road was put in. Some remains were found. Of course, they don't tell us where. There's certainly no GPS coordinates or anything helpful like that. We just know that when Locust Street was put in, human remains were found. Well, that's not surprising, certainly given that we expect it ran right through the middle of the road. Number three was that Van Dyke house. I think a basement was dug for that. They found, again, human remains. Number four, I think one of these, it was reported a sewage line going in along Church Avenue. We don't know where. I put it here because of the overlap, but it could have been anywhere along this line. Five and six are both from more recent archaeological investigations. I think they did some mechanical trenching in this area, a couple of trenches, one here and one over here, that found some remains. We don't know if they were remains in situ. They were disarticulated human remains, so they could have been disturbed at an earlier date, and then they were recovered by archaeologists in the last 10, 15 years. But these are all obviously showing, well, this is an area where human remains have been recovered during other disturbances. That obviously it's unfortunate. It's a shame this has not just been left alone, but at least they are helping us to extend our knowledge of where we know this burial ground potentially covered in the past. Here we go. This was just showing the previous investigations, because it's not just all those other, construction, demolition, and utility installation that has disturbed the ground, because archaeologists also disturb, and that's why I always push geophysical techniques, because they're non-invasive, they're not destructive to the subsurface. The archaeological work has also dug in, and thankfully they recover material and they record where it's from. So it's preservation by record, as we say in archaeology. But all those disturbances, plus the ones in that previous map, they are all things that potentially can show up in the geophysical survey that I do. And I put this all out there partly as a caveat and to sort of preempt the results that we're now going to see. Is trying to see burials amongst all of this other noise is incredibly hard. Early burials, and by early I can mean anything older than 100, 150 years, sometimes they can be very difficult to distinguish and to correctly identify, certainly to be confident about the results. When you factor in all the later disturbances, it makes it a very, very confusing and very complicated and challenging situation. Something like this excavation trench here is just about the same size and shape as a burial, and I wouldn't necessarily know the difference between the two. Does anybody have any questions at this stage before I even show any data? Everyone's still with me?
I have one question. I hope you can hear me. I'm in a coffee shop.
I can, Alex. Yeah.
I think it's helpful to know. Also, hi, good to see you. You mentioned that you're looking at data and differentiating how long it takes to get something emitted back to you. That's a time-based analysis. Can you give an idea of how long that time is? Are you thinking in like milliseconds or seconds? Like, what's the scale for that?
It's nanoseconds. It's
Why?
incredibly fast. I mean, it's electromagnetic energy, so light is electromagnetic energy, right? We're all essentially in in that sort of scale. So it's very, very fast. Um, as soon as you get into the ground, things are slowing down, but it's still very fast. It's not like going down to, seconds or like, half seconds or anything. It's very, very fast with its subtle changes in that velocity, that speed of the energy, but it's very, very quick. That is how we are able to. I can run with this radar and still take a reading every inch. If I go too fast, it will beep. So I can basically move beyond where I need it to be to get that reflection to come back. But that's also because at each position I'm taking and averaging something like 8 readings to sort of average out background noise and interference, maybe from radio waves and taxis and the police frequencies. Like walkie-talkies get picked up by this stuff. I mean, The antenna in the radar is a receiver and a transmitter. So the transmitter's sending out what we want, to go into the ground, and it's bouncing back. The receiver, though, is going to pick up everything. It's going to pick up cell phone signals, like I say, taxi kind of two-way radios, all that kind of stuff. So there's all kinds of noise, especially in an urban environment. And you've got power cables. They also have kind of resonant frequencies that are around. Um, so when I collect the data, we are sort of averaging a whole lot of that, and then even part of the processing, I try and focus on just the frequencies that going to be most informative to us. So leave out the higher and lower ends that are probably due to extraneous stuff, like two-way radios and what have you. But yeah, in nanoseconds, so I forget how many zeros that is back after the decimal place, but it's like a millionth of a second. It's fast. Um,
Thank you.
sure.
A follow-up question to that, since you're saying that it takes it takes a it picks up a lot of different sounds. I'm wondering, and you'll tell us more about the results. Would it have been beneficial of maybe doing the study at night, knowing that that is a very busy intersection, as you notice, Church Avenue is like it's the hub of everything. Would you have gotten, and this may be a question for later on after you see the results, but I'm just wondering, would it have been beneficial to have had it done in the evening when it's quiet? Because that area is actually very dismal at night, that you probably would have gotten a different reading. I was just wondering, since you said it picks up all these different sounds.
That's a good question. The data probably would look a little different, but only in those sort of higher frequencies that we're not really interested in anyway. And since I can process those out, thankfully it's not an issue. So while yes, if I did a side-by-side comparison of the data, if I subtracted one from another, you would see something. None of them would be on the order of like the types of reflection we're getting back from archaeological features. So it adds a little bit of noise, kind of like the sort of the background sort of snow you might see on a TV or TV screen, but that doesn't affect what my interpretation. So it might have been nicer to have done this area. I probably could have covered more of the ground at night, the ground in the intersection and so on. But people also drive faster, I think, at night because they can.
That's
So
true.
no, I don't. Thankfully, I don't think any of that. I don't think any of that negatively impacted what I was able to do as far as the data quality go. But that's an interesting. It's a good question. Yeah. And we have different frequencies of radar. I mean, the reason some of the radars look very different is that some are very big boxes and some are smaller boxes, and that's in part due to the size of the antennas, with higher frequencies having smaller antennas. So very small frequency radar can be used to just people call it pavement scanning or like on bridge scanning, just to look at the reinforcement, the rebar, or how thick pavement is. These techniques are used by a whole lot of different practitioners. It's not just for archaeology; it's engineering, utilities, as I mentioned, geology. And so some people are very interested in just the first couple of inches of the soil. Some are interested, like I am, in the first like 6, 8, 10 feet. Geologists want to look multiple feet, maybe miles underground. And so we can work on different frequencies. And the frequency that I use here is 350 megahertz. It's a really good kind of middle frequency for these depths and these sort of size of targets. So, when we're expecting to see things that are 6 inches to 2, 3 feet across, 4, 5, 6 feet. It's sort of the best method or the best technology that I've found for most archaeological situations for detecting the stuff we want and also helping me to distinguish from the things that I'm less interested in. I'll keep going and come to some of this maybe afterwards if there's still more questions on this. So what I'm going to show is some of these time slices, and I put them in color. I generally like grayscales, but I know people like color. Sometimes it's helpful to see. And this looks like a heat map. This isn't heat. This has nothing to do with heat, but it's a good analogy for what we are seeing here. So this has been created by compiling all of those individual 10-inch separated profiles, walking up and down, getting that 3D block, and then like sort of resampling and looking at these horizontal maps. Um, this one is, yeah, the upper 10 centimeters. This is basically a map of the ground surface. So what we're seeing here are differences really in maybe topography, because if the ground's a little bit lower, it's going to take slightly longer for that energy to go from the radar to the ground to bounce back. Tiny, tiny difference, but it's there. But mostly this is from the different material that the ground surface is made of, because that reflection is going to be stronger where the ground surface is more different, if that makes sense. So reflection from asphalt, from concrete, from soil, from grass, they're all going to be slightly different, because it depends how that energy then changes as it goes into that new material. So from outside the grassy park area here, the data look very different, and that's because this is all either a concrete or an asphalt, a tarmac surface. And there's even differences between the road and the sidewalk, and I forget, this may be concrete and asphalt. Sometimes going over a utility cover, a manhole, whatever, an iron cover is going to show up as a very strong reflection because that's very different to the surroundings. The grass, oh, and how lush the grass is going to show up compared to like areas where maybe there's more rocks, or it's more soil is exposed. And we know this area has been disturbed, so the grass is not even across. Some places there's more debris, there's more rock and concrete. This area along the side here, I think there was some more open areas, barren areas. There was a void in one place. There's I think I forget if it was actual flagging or concrete out there that was exposed. But basically, yeah, in the top 4 inches of the surface, we're not going to see anything that's necessarily archaeologically informative or anything about a burial ground, but it helps to see, okay, what disturbances may exist on the surface that are going to continue down. This line down here, it's exactly parallel with one of our transects, and you can see things like this just from the data collection. Maybe I had someone pushing the radar here who's putting more weight on it. I happen to think actually this is real. I think this is part of a wall from the school, because we'll see as we go down, this continues to show up. But at this layer, yeah, we're really just seeing very, very shallow or even just surface changes. Oh, over here, these two things, these are iron covers. I think these are like the sort of bulkhead entrances they're called to access to a basement under this property over here. They continue down. When you get metal like that, you get what we call ringing. That energy comes down from the radar and the antenna into the metal, bounces back. Some of it bounces off the bottom of the metal, bounces off the top of the metal, bounces off the bottom of the metal, and then comes back, and the energy rings around inside metal. So sometimes when you go over a thick piece of metal, piece of iron, it's very hard to see anything below it because of this ringing. But at least those are very isolated instances, so it's not like this is, hindering what we can say about the entire area.
Tim, just for clarity, if you
Mm,
could go back,
of course.
the areas where you yeah, there you go. So the dark brown, light brownish color, we're assuming that is more concrete asphalt, and the areas where it's a reddish color, reddish orange, that can possibly be metal or iron.
Pretty much, yeah, but not
Okay.
always. Like, so these areas up here, these are asphalt. It may be that they're just slightly higher. I mean, often in a road you have a slight camber, right? It's raised up to help the runoff. So this
Okay.
is a combination of both surface material changes, but also topography. So like just the relative sort of just the shape of the of the surface.
Brown. Okay.
So we see things like the edge, even just the curve here around the edge is showing up, and that's partly because the radar, as it goes across the as I go from the raised sidewalk to the road, there's a drop down, right? There's a step down, but the radar is big enough that it doesn't immediately drop down into the road. So for a brief moment as I'm going, there's a greater distance greater depth of air between the radar and the ground surface. And then I come onto the road. Whoops, I'm going too far. So I clicked on my mouse. As I go onto the road, then I think the road is rising up. And so here it's like basically this is much closer to the radar antenna. But these are very subtle changes. Um, they can pick up, sometimes you can pick up even just changes in the paint because it might be thicker layers of paint. But you can pick up raised areas of yeah, like I say, maybe a slight foundation, even if there's nothing to see on the surface. The ground surface might be just ever so slightly more shallow there, like slightly higher than here. If you're walking, you might feel that with your foot. Pieces of rubble will be projecting above a ground surface. So
Okay.
this isn't always particularly informative. Sometimes it is. Sometimes I might see a long trench from a utility. I was actually just at another cemetery 2 weeks ago and I just started looking at the data. And because it's a current cemetery, it's still in use, you get subsidence over burials. That soil that goes back in because it's looser, as it compacts over time, over decades, you might see a slight depression over a burial.
Mm.
And sometimes that very first map, even the first 4 inches, even though I'm not detecting the inhumation, a burial, a coffin, a void, I'm just seeing that slight depression, that sort of sinking in of ground over a grave. So that would show things like this. These are all slight areas of subsidence. In this instance, I don't think any of these are related to burials, but this is the kind of thing I would be looking out for in a map like this from this kind of a depth. So I'm relying on like every piece of information I can get to try and understand what's going on below the surface. I don't just go and look at 6 feet down, are there burials? No, okay, move on. It's drawing on all the data that I can to try and interpret what's going on here.
So the
I'll quickly just
areas
say that
that are gray, the areas that you was pointing to that are gray, those are the areas that makes you pause and want to inquire more.
the areas
The areas that are
like the
grayish, it
mhm,
looks kind of grayish. Yeah, where you're pointing. Yeah.
yep, these things.
Mm-hmm.
There are areas that are, yeah, just slight depressions that are in some situations. I don't think so here because how much ground disturbance there has been over the years since the cemetery. If this had not been touched, these would all be areas I would then be questioning why is the ground just a little bit lower there? Has it been cut out and so it's lower, or is it subsidence? Was there a hole that has just compacted over time as the soil that was put back in the hole has settled? Um, In this instance, I don't think so because of, like I say, there's been so many other disturbances. This is the area, as we'll see as we move forward. This is the area of the later school buildings. So this is just variations in the subsidence of the fill of the school basements, unfortunately. Um, there are some other gaps in here that look gray. This is actually a bus shelter, so I didn't collect data inside the bus shelter. I could easily get it. This is all with GPS, so it was hard. There's little slithers where there's things that are missing. I think there's like a trash can and road signs, and there were cars parked along the edge of the road. I actually covered the sidewalk and then did a couple of transects into the road as well. I did everything I could that was not life-threatening out there to collect the data. Um, Yeah, we wanted to get as much as possible, I think, in here. This probably actually is just it looks like that I couldn't collect data, but I think the value is just so high or so low in this instance. It's off that end of the scale. This is just another slight depression. So I don't want to focus on this too much because I don't really think there's any information in this one, but I just include it because these are all in the sequence that are in that report. So I'm going to jump down. I just showed these for every foot, basically. When I process these and go through them, I actually go every 5, sometimes every 10 centimeters. But for simplicity, just so as not to kind of overwhelm you with too much information, we're looking at every foot here. And these are actually 10 centimeter ranges, so 4-inch thick slices each time anyway. So 30 centimeters is actually 20 to 30. So that would be um, what is this going to be like 8 to 12 inches. So again, I've just simplified this up here in your title, but this is roughly 1 foot down. So again, all those pieces of iron on the surface, you'll see they're still showing up, and that's because of this ringing. That's not because these utility covers are 1 foot thick. I mean, they're only what maximum an inch. But they're showing up. But we start to see other sort of alignments over here under the road, and I think there's going to be utilities or utility trenches. We may not be seeing the utilities themselves. Under the roads, though, these aren't just layers of asphalt that go directly over the natural surface. They're made up with all kinds of sub-road materials. There can be gravel put down, other things, just to keep it level, stop compaction, at least to keep an even surface. Inside our fenced area here, we can start to see the outline of the school, and that's again because of differences in the fill of that basement that had been there and undisturbed soil, or at least maybe less disturbed soil. But I think a lot of this has had disturbance. I think some of the excavation, the archaeological excavation, this area out here, I think they found some evidence of some privies or something. I forget precisely where those are. It's been a long time since I looked at all this, but even at this depth, 1 foot, I wouldn't expect to see burials, but we might start to see the burial shaft, the grave shaft. But we can see this is noisy. If this was just complete, clean, undisturbed soil, I would expect it to look more like this. See how this is just more uniform, more just a consistent, even background. Once I start seeing this kind of thing, this is telling me the soil is completely inhomogeneous. It's very mixed. It's very disturbed. And it could be disturbed just from being dug out and put back, and it's clods of soil that are more compact and then air spaces. But in this instance, I think there's all kinds of debris that's been put down, the demolition. Some of this may be from fill, but it may also just be a spread of material. I don't know how much material has been dumped down on top of the remains of I mean, even if they completely removed this, even the walls of the school, I don't think they'd hauled it all out and brought in completely fresh, clean, sterile soil. This is basically, I think, all rubble and debris that has been smoothed out to prepare a level surface, and that would suddenly fit with what we saw when we were setting out the grids here to collect the data. All those tapes and lines I had set out, we had one line down the middle, and trying to put the stakes in to hold those tapes in place was impossible in this section here because of chunks of concrete, brick. I don't know, we can always see it, but it wasn't just a nice, clean, loamy soil that I might see elsewhere. It's very noisy. But yeah, that's again not showing up a huge amount, but there may be just some of the differences just in the surface materials in the road here, or even potentially utility lines coming through. But again, what these are all beginning to show are just this general picture of, yes, as expected, there's a lot of disturbed ground. So now we're about 2 feet down, 60 centimeters or 50 to 60. So again, it's just a little bit lower than 2 feet to 2 feet. And some of these earlier structures are showing up very clearly. I think this is probably part of, if it's not that Van Dyke house, it's one of the later buildings that was over here. And I guess there's maybe some other structural remains down here. It is often hard, though, with the GPR data, as I've said before, to distinguish between a pipe in the ground, say like a plastic pipe that's 6-8 inches thick, is going to look very similar to GPR to maybe the remains of a foundation, depending on the nature of the foundation, how much is still intact, how much is in place. But I know when I look in plan, well, it wouldn't make much sense for a pipe to come out, turn through 90 degrees, and then go back again. But strange things happen. People do some strange things in the ground. So I think things like this are probably structural remains, maybe down here. In this area, though, this matches perfectly with what we know to be the footprint of the latest full extent of that structure. You had the earliest structure of the school that had those sort of two bigger north and south sections with a slightly narrower central section, and then later it was extended to the south of this much bigger wing, whatever. We're even seeing this is shown. I mean, this building was standing until relatively recently, right? So with there's photos of it, we have it on maps. These are access points. These are, I think, steps that went down into the basement. I mean, this structure did have a full basement. So not only are we seeing, okay, steps that entered in from outside and went down. But we also know, and this is confirming, this whole area has been dug out to a depth that would extend beyond what I would expect burials to have been. So any burials that were present in this area, if they were, and I don't know, we have no proof that they extended even this far to the south, but this is all gone. This soil has been removed 100 years ago, and there'll be no point in doing any kind of work in this area. I think this may be part of a utility that's coming in this maybe as well. Some of the utilities may have been removed and they'd be hard to see. There's all these other little reflections in here, things like this. If it was just this and all the rest was this nice uniform quiet gray, I'd be very interested in that. But because of all the other noise, like this or this in any other situation, I would say, oh, that could be a burial. It's, roughly 6 feet long. It's east-west orientation. So it's the right size. 60 centimeters, 2 feet seems shallow, but burials are rarely 6 feet, and 6 feet would only be to the bottom anyway. So it's quite possible you might start to see the top of a burial at less than 2 feet, and certainly by 2 feet. So something like this, in another situation, I should be very clear, I would be focusing on that. There's a little gap here though in the data, and I remember this is where there is that void. There's a hole into the ground. You can look down. This is part of a pipeline, a utility, a drain, or something that ran between the road and the school. So I can know very quickly this has another reason. This has another explanation. This thing up here, it's a little strange. It seems more north-south than east-west. It's possible. It's something that could be flagged, but I'm not confident that this would be caused by a burial, and it's really one of the few anomalies out here that sort of sticks out to me. But there's a lot of other things out here, lots of other disturbances from all manner of things, and with the school buildings that have been here, who knows? I mean, it could be a hole dug to plant a tree. I think there's so many reasons why people dig holes, right? And trying to tease those out in GPR data is very challenging. Over on this side, we're starting to see some more lines. This actually matches up. I don't know. I didn't highlight it when I showed you the earlier map, but one of the school buildings here had a WCs. I think there was the boys and girls or something. There were two basically adjoining restrooms in this area. They're starting to show up. I wanted to overlap with that when we did the survey. But then the large tree here, we know tree roots disturb the ground, and then having a structure here, it didn't make sense to continue much farther. This is really a sort of area of focus. Going to continue now down to 3 feet. This is where I would expect to start seeing, burials, and that I would be more confident about identifying them. And here's our anomaly here, the one that I said before. This is one that I would have been jumping right in on, like, oh, that's great, but we already know that has an alternative explanation. And really all we're seeing are the school, the filled school basement, the structure out here. I think parts of maybe that structure that was here, either the Van Dyke or later building. I think utility trenches or the utilities themselves starting to show up. All of this is incredibly homogeneous. It's very quiet. I'm not seeing anything under this road. If we're expecting this cemetery extended out like this, I don't see anything. And these are just looking at these time slices, these horizontal maps. I went through each of these profiles that we collected, every 10 inches, as I say, and I highlighted any reflection that I saw, and none of them had the characteristics or the shape or the extent that made me confident that there was anything that looked like a burial, anything that I could distinguish as a burial. Jumping down now 4 feet, again, I would still be expecting to see maybe some burials. This is where we continue to see some of this ringing, so we're even now still seeing some of the some of that change just from the curb and the step from the sidewalk. I know these are caused by things on the surface, but they appear to be repeated in those profiles, but I know they're all, you know, they're not of interest. These are the metal utility covers again, the backfill here. And there's isolated reflections. Some of these are from debris that's close to the surface that we see as ringing as we come down. If I go back up to more shallow, you'll see things like this one here, if you can see that. And over here, I don't know if you're seeing those. They're just two that I'm happen to be picking out right now. I'll keep my cursor over that as we come down from the 2 to 3 to 4 feet. They keep showing up. So I flag all of those. I mark those as being from something that's more shallow. So even though I'm seeing something down here and think, oh, could this be part of a grave marker, or could this be related to a burial in any way? No, it's caused by some more shallow piece of metal or some other debris that's closer to the surface that's not actually 4 feet below. It's 1 or 2 feet or even more shallow. Yep, these are all far, far stronger than anything that I would expect to be a burial, but I know that there's from those utility covers. And even continuing down here, this is, yeah, 4 feet down. We'll go down 5 feet down. I mean, I'm seeing differences in the fill of the of the school, which is great. It's proving that the GPR is working, and we're seeing down easily, getting great data from 5 feet down. That extension that was built on the school apparently was deeper than the rest of the school here, or suddenly had a different material in its backfill. But I'm thinking it's probably a deeper, slightly deeper basement, but nothing else in here that's not related to later construction, utilities, or disturbances. So ultimately, what I do is I produce what's supposed to make that simpler as an interpretation, and clean things out. So showing things like the filled basement, the basically sort of removed basement that's been backfilled with some other material. Alignments, trends that show up that could relate to utilities, could relate to road construction, differences in road construction material, possible utilities that are running through here, other foundations. E was one I highlighted on a few times as that, that anomaly that at first glance has a lot of those characteristics that I might, say, yes, they're burial related, but we know has another explanation. And then D over here, D was one of many. There's A, B, and C over here. These are all consistent with, like I say, cut and filled features. So this is where someone has dug a hole and then it's been backfilled with something different. Now, that would explain a burial, but it also explains a lot of other things like latrines, or digging for a utility, for a drain, for a privy, for planting a tree, right? They all potentially have other explanations, but they're all buried features that are being picked up as anomalies by the radar that I couldn't rule any of these out as being a burial, but I don't think any of them are burials, to be sort of very clear about that. I think they all have other explanations. So that's sort of, like I say, the final figure in the report, overlaying where I had mapped that sort of earliest shown map of the burial ground, the burying ground from 1855, but we know was after the burial ground had sort of gone out of use. But if it continued this way, well, we know, well, a lot of this section has been not just disturbed, but I think would say destroyed by the school. There was also that first school here, which I was surprised I couldn't see any indication of that at all in the GPR data. That Flatbush #1 school out here. I'm pretty confident that we have the map of the location of that correct in the map. I mean, there is something here that could be structural. This could also relate to the later school and utilities in some way. These might not be like 3 sides of a structure, but that could be one utility and 2 other utilities coming down that, of course, just seem to look like they're joined and make a C shape. Now, maybe that school, when it was removed and backfilled, was backfilled just with the local soils. And so it is essentially the same, especially if it's packed down. It's not going to have the GPR contrast. This school basement showing up more clearly because it's not backfilled with the local soil. It's backfilled probably with all just demolition material, because you got all that rubble, you've got a big hole. Well, you can kill two birds with one stone, right? But this, I mean, I don't know. I was a little surprised that that school didn't show up. And the explanation I would have is because it was backfilled with just the same soil that essentially came out. But I don't know. That is sort of still out to question. But the sort of the combined result of both what we did with the GPR survey and I think with the sequence of maps is to show that the burial ground probably extended much further outside of this location. It's only really this small corner here of the 1855 map, and if it did extend further west, yes, then there was a greater overlap, but it also overlapped more with the road outside because Church Avenue was brought south to have this sort of straighter alignment. So we went into this with expectations that it was going to be limited and challenging, and it was, I think, more limited and more challenging than I had anticipated and hoped for. But this is what we got. I don't know that a different GPR survey at night, like covering this area, it could help. Doing the survey over a slightly different area, basically to coincide more with here, but also maybe using a different GPR. I don't know. That would give us. It wouldn't give us different information. We wouldn't suddenly have, oh, here's the burial ground. We will manage to cover, a couple of good blocks of this 1855 mapped location, and there's really nothing in there that are obvious burials. I think these things all match up too well with later foundations to be burial. And the technology, the technique hasn't changed in the years since we've done this, that now there's suddenly a better tool that I would say, oh, if we use this new piece of equipment, we would be able to map it. This is, I think, as far as we can go using suddenly currently available and suddenly, I think, existing techniques for the next decade, suddenly 5 years. This is the best we can do using radar at this time, and it's very limited. So that was all I had there, other than to say thank you and to open this up to questions. But I will jump back again here. I'm going to quickly shut my window because there's a lot of mowing outside. I don't know how well you can hear me or hear that. I'll be back in just a second.
So while Tim is closing his window, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. If you prefer to ask your questions, Alex will be monitoring the Q&A part. But I do have one question before we go into opening up for everyone. You didn't go 6 feet, because when we think of burial grounds or when we think of any form of burying anything, we think 6 feet under. So you only went as far as 5 feet?
No, we actually went deeper. I think I stopped showing these images just because they were. This is really, you're just seeing the same thing again. I think we just continue to see these reflections.
Mm-hmm.
I forget if in the report they stop at 5 feet, but no, I think looking down, I think we got at least 2 meters, which is closer to 8 feet.
Okay.
I've looked at over, I think, more than 60 cemeteries now, and I've never detected a burial below 6 feet, and I don't think I've ever seen really anything that wasn't appearing above 4 feet, even if it continued down to 6 feet. Yeah, I see this sort of is misleading here. Looks like we stopped. We didn't look for anything below 5 feet. We did. The radar was looking deeper than that. But in my experience, burials tend to start
Okay.
at least 2 feet down.
Okay.
Now we know there's a lot of disturbance here, and with roads being put in and things, yes, the ground could have been built up. So things can get deeper just because of more material being dumped on the top. Um, Out here, I don't think that's the case. With given the other structures, I mean, like this is the post office, right? I think out here at the top.
Correct.
That's we're not stepping down into that. So it's not like the ground surface outside, I think, has risen dramatically in the past, say, 100 years. That they say to, 1, 2, 3 feet of overburden that's been dumped on top. So um I'm confident that we've looked deep enough to to see to see any burials.
Alex, I'm going to tag you in with the Q&A section of this presentation.
Yeah. A couple of things. For folks who don't know me, my name is Alex McDougall. I am a PhD candidate at Columbia, and my work focuses on the history of slavery in Maryland, looking at similar burial grounds, but also engaging folks like you all who are descendants or considered descendant community who have a vested interest in what happens to these burial grounds. And I'm part of the board for FABGC, which is really exciting. If you all have questions, feel free to either add them in the chat or you can raise your hand, but I'm happy to facilitate however you're most comfortable asking Tim a question. Tim's been really lovely and happy to explain things, so we appreciate that. First, Tim, I really appreciate the care you put into going through all this data, both in how you communicated it to us, but also it seems like you were really detailed and sort of diligent in going through. You mentioned the different time slices, and I really appreciate that. The two questions I had are first, what a lot of folks are really interested actually on the day of you going out and doing GPR, and people were really keen to sort of push the machine around, ask questions. And in case any of those folks are listening or watching, I wonder what you would point them toward if they want to get more serious about GPR and start doing similar work to what you're doing. I know you have tons of experience. Where you want to direct folks to start is my first question, whether it be books or courses or anything. The second question, it's okay if you don't have an answer to, because I know you mentioned that this type of burial ground, like historic Black burial grounds, are not the typical sort of project that you work on. You have a pretty wide range of what you look at. Sorry, there's a coffee machine going, so I'm sorry if you can't hear. But I wonder if you have any idea or know about any unique geophysical signatures of looking at historic Black burial grounds. So you mentioned sort of things facing east-west and 6 feet and sort of typical burial features, but like, is there anything different you've noticed about burial grounds for enslaved folks or just any historic Black burial, given the different sort of cultural and spiritual practices?
Okay, thanks. Firstly, thank you for the for the remark about the presentation. I try and be very, very careful with the data, both in the data collection, but then in sort of teasing through. I mean, I often just collect my own data, in part because it's the most crucial thing. Anything you can do with the data afterwards is only as good as the data you collect. So yeah, that high resolution and just making sure everything's being done carefully. You may remember, if you're out there, my notebook, writing down the start and stop coordinate of each line and things. Not everybody does that. And I think it is a crucial part of this. And then going through it. It can be very easy with radar or with any geophysical technique to sort of pull out the most obvious stuff, but it's trying to like a foundation like this, a big filled void is a basement is easy, but it's the subtle stuff that takes a lot of time and care and experience. And this sort of gets onto your first question about the where to go for more information. I think in the previous presentation I did, I included some books at the end. I actually took it out of this thinking, oh, I did that last time. But I think that video, isn't it still available through the website? I think there's 3 or 4 books there that were mentioned. There aren't many places to go and learn this. I mean, you probably would have to. I guess I should step back from that. If you were serious enough about doing this, say for archaeological prospection, then you would have to look at a degree course to sort of get some of this background. You'll have picked up from my accent. Those of you that didn't know me previously, I'm not from around here. I was born in England, and I got all my training in England. And geophysical techniques have been much more commonplace there. In the 90s, they really took off, and they're used sort of almost in advance of any archaeological survey, because why wouldn't you begin with something that's non-invasive? But in the States, it was slower to pick up, and so there were fewer places training and teaching in it, which meant there's been fewer practitioners. Um, so you can get training at a university now, those that do it, and there's a handful of places that focus on more, say, geoscience or geoarchaeology or like um, yeah, I guess it's that archaeological science sort of broadly in that way. But these techniques, because they're used by so many different practitioners, you can get experience. I mean, you can go just direct to the manufacturers and get training through them. I think if you buy a radar, they'll give you a day of training. Like this particular one is manufactured in New Hampshire, and if you buy one of their GPRs, you can get to New Hampshire, you can get a day of training with it. Um, but also you can get, demos of equipment from various companies. But to go back to the point I was making before, it is it is quite easy just to push a card up and down. It's a lot like mowing the lawn, right? And even every time I upload these pictures to PowerPoint, and with all the AI sort of recognition of pictures now, it always tells me someone pushing a lawnmower in a field. It's like, thanks. Um, the skill comes in after the fact. I mean, it's both the processing of the data to clean it up, to pull out that extraneous noise I was talking about, to highlight the things you want without accidentally deleting or removing the things you don't want, or adding in artifacts from processing, adding in effects into the data, and then the interpretation. You can learn that to an extent, but it takes experience, and then that's a challenge as well. Where do people go to get experience? It's limited. It is restricted, and I'm sort of a lucky one right now because I have almost 30 years of experience doing this, and I sort of doing things like this, getting out there in the field with people, letting everybody have a go and asking questions. I really enjoy it. It's energizing. It's good to see people interested in it and getting to answer questions, but hopefully, yeah, generating more interest in people doing this elsewhere. A lot of my work, it's just me. I mean, I just did a 4-acre cemetery in Maryland that was an African American burial ground, and it was just me out there. There's people walking their dogs, and they'll stop and ask what's going on every day, and they ask for updates because I see the same people each day. Um, but there's not too many people that do this, and I think a lot of this, like a lot of archaeology, people get very excited and say, "Oh, you're an archaeologist. I've always wanted to do that." A lot of people, when they get a bit of experience, they go out on their first dig, they learn quite quickly. It's pretty dull. There's a lot of slow, meticulous, repetitive work. This is walking up and down. I mean, each acre pushing the GPR at this interval is 10 miles of walking. And I think this is just over 3/4 of an acre altogether. So yeah, we've got at least 7.5 miles of data just here. It's a lot of data. It's like a lot of things. That if you like walking and you like being outside, and like I do, then it's a fun job. It appeals to both sides of my brain. Um, your other question, remind me again where you went with that.
Yeah, first, what can I ask? I'm
Oh,
in
yes.
Baltimore now, right now, but I'm based. What's the Maryland burial? Is it in Baltimore or somewhere else?
This is Howard County. Um,
Oh, wow. Okay.
it's a community cemetery that I think goes back to the 1800s,
Oh,
like
awesome. I will
mid
email
early
you about stuff about
1800s.
it.
Yeah,
Okay, awesome. Shout
that's right.
more.
Because you were asking
Um,
about burial practices or potential
yeah, the second
distinguishing.
question was,
Yeah.
yeah, are there distinguishing or sort of different geophysical signatures that you find for these burials compared to sort of typical, like European traditional burial practices?
Yeah, yeah, that is a very interesting question. And at the moment, I've actually worked on a lot of African American cemeteries in Maryland, in like Montgomery County, Prince George's County. Uh, I get known for something in a region, and then I continue to just keep going back and just doing the same thing. So I do a lot of like colonial stuff in Delaware and the Eastern Shore, and then Southern Maryland, and it's a lot of cemeteries. Um, in Maryland of late, it's just funny how that goes. But over best part of 15 years now, I've worked in a lot of cemeteries, and there's been a lot of funding in Maryland for historic African American cemeteries, specifically. Um, so there have been a lot of those. Now, geophysically, I don't know if there's been that many. if there's anything that sort of stands out as being different. I mean, certainly some of the grave markers have been quite different. And the ways of marking burials, right? So suddenly early on, there may not be the formal marble limestone headstones. You know, they're expensive. That may not be accessible to everybody. So there can be all manner, and it just may be a different tradition. So I've worked in cemeteries. In fact, there was one in Staten Island where a lot of the burials were marked with shell. Um, and then yeah, just maybe simple stone. Sometimes we just refer to it as field stone, like in Maryland. There may just be locally available large rocks that have then been placed to mark. And sometimes they may have some initials or maybe some more information inscribed in. Um, but field stones and shell are things that are very easily disturbed and moved and lost. Um, the advent, I think, of gas mowers for all burial grounds was terrible. I think a lot of grave markers were lost. As a result, all those obstacles, they're just in the way. They're inconvenient. The stones get pushed down, and this is everybody's stones, not not unique to any one cultural group. Um, Stones get damaged or lost. Some early markers may have been wooden crosses, if they were marked at all. But things like shell, go over that with a mower, and it's gone. Um, People even today might they're being helpful in doing clearances of cemeteries to like help see things, and they might. I've seen this when there's been, they're in forests and people move trees and down limbs using machines, and they just push the topsoil to one side, and we're losing all those stones, gravestones, shell, whatever else it may be. It may just be things that were left, like offerings that were left, bottles or what have you. So I always tell people any clearance has got to be done manually. It's got to be done by hand. It's got to be very careful, and ideally with an archaeologist around to help monitor that stuff. So yeah, the grave, even when there are stones, there may be different types of marker. They may just be blocks of concrete, may just be cinder block. I've seen bricks, pipes. I've seen some beautiful slate, and sometimes with engravings on that things like that have been unique to African American grounds I've worked in. But geophysically, probably the only difference I would say is in part reflecting the maybe limited access or limited sort of financial situation. You may not have, these hardwood coffins and caskets used in early historic burials. They may just be shrouds that are, shroud wrapped individual placed in the ground. And that makes detecting it geophysically today, 100, 150, 200 years later or more, makes it even more difficult. So even like, for example, out here, me not detecting anything, and this is something I learned very early on at university, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Not detecting anything cannot be proof that there is nothing there. And that yeah, should have been something I stressed before the questions came up. Because it could be very easy for someone to come along and say, well, yeah, Horsley didn't detect anything. His report shows there's nothing there. We can now build an apartment block, or we can do whatever here. No, that because I have not seen anything that I can confidently identify as a burial is not proof that burials are not there. We have enough other evidence, right, that there is a burial ground. This was used as a burying ground um, for more than 100 years, I think, and we just cannot see it with the equipment that we have today. You would have to dig. And even digging, it's still going to be challenging to identify some of this. I mean, the fact that people were finding human remains in other activities out here, even when they weren't looking for burials, right? Constructions of basements and so forth. Teeth will survive longer because of the material, the hydroxyapatite that's in teeth will last longer than bone. It's a very, resistant mineral. But because, yeah, bone will decompose. I mean, a big reason we return bodies to the ground is for this return. This, decomposition is a part of that, and there have been many situations in the cemetery surveys that I've done, again, all types of cemetery, where in as little as 70 or 80 years, it can be very hard to identify a burial. Now, not all of them. Some of them show up very clearly for a couple of hundred years or more. Um, it just depends, I think, on the type of burial. Is that, the type of coffin that was used. It depends on the soil type that is there, the water content, the hydrology, so water history. Many, many factors impact um, the rate of sort of decomposition or the ability of then radar to work in that environment and what can be detected. And that will affect both my geophysical approach, but also it would affect any archaeological approach. Trees have probably been the biggest factor in for me in speeding up that rate of loss of a detectable geophysical anomaly. Big mature trees, which is actually I find a beautiful thing. If I'm going to a cemetery and there's these huge mature like oak trees or whatever around the perimeter and in the cemetery, I know it's going to make my job very difficult to find anything because I see all the roots, they disturb the ground, but it means the remains have been feeding this tree. I mean, the people are in the trees. It's beautiful. It's like it's all these sort of minerals and all these organics. It's new life. I see that as a beautiful thing, but it means when I see big trees, I think, oh, I'm not going to be able to give a great map of all the burials to somebody. But that was a very long-winded answer to your two questions.
It was great. Thanks.
Tim, just for clarity, is it safe for us to say that, because I like the way you said that the absence of evidence doesn't mean that evidence was absent. Um, is it safe to say that it's possible that during this particular inhumane times, enslaved people were not in wooden coffins, that maybe the practice at this time was wrapping them with cloth and putting them there, therefore there won't be there won't be any kind of evidence that there was a traditional, in a traditional sense, of a burial um, ground spacing. Is it safe to say that? Because I'm
Yeah.
just thinking about
Yeah.
when we present and do our next stage of community engagement, and when members of the community ask questions, as well as when we have to address the political climate, whoever that will be mayor, right? That, listen, just because you haven't seen anything, this is what has happened. And we can also um, add the fact that traditions that we know of was not practiced during that particular time, especially for these particular individuals, because they were looked at as property.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. Firstly, these data don't say how folks here were buried. I mean, we can't because we're not seeing anything. I can't say either one way or another. But as I would be careful with just using the word tradition. I know we sort of maybe compare things to what's traditional. I mean, the tradition here may not have been to use a casket or a coffin, right? So I think there are many traditions. No one is better or right or wrong or whatever else than any other. Um, and I mean, I don't know who here is doing the burying. I assume it's going to be loved ones, and their tradition is still going to be to care, and I think wrapping in a shroud, and that's all. That may have been the full tradition and the full rites of burial and sort of the funerary rites. That may have been the full procedure. To be kind of very clinical about it, I think. There's obviously a lot of questions here. This hasn't really answered any questions. It's added more information, but it hasn't told us the extent of the cemetery, how many people are there, where folks are still buried and undisturbed? These are all questions that are still out there, and it's unfortunate. A lot of people want a binary, right? In these kind of cemetery surveys, is there somebody there or not? And when you see burials very clearly in GPR, then I can make some very clear statements. But when I don't see them, like I said, that's not proof that they're not there. It adds more confidence to, like, if I see things to what I can be confident about not seeing, but it's never proof that it's not. So I forget exactly where I was going to go with that. There's very likely human remains under this intersection. I think my takeaways are that we know that this is a burial ground. The burial ground is at this intersection. This intersection was not here at the time. The road was not here at the time. There's been all these later use and reuse of the land, either in ignorance or just not caring, it not mattering why. I think there are obviously questions that you'll have now about how best to commemorate this, how best to inform people about this. I mean, having a monument or some sort of commemoration in this space, if you have access to this space, if you own this space, if you're allowed to put something up, I would say get it as close to here as possible. But I think, yeah, could something be marked out on the ground? I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of questions, I think, for you, and then to take forward to the powers that be today, right, about who owns, uses this space. But unfortunately, the radar data aren't telling us anything about the nature of the burials. I think the later use of this speaks to of how these people were valued at the time and later. But the fact that there was a burial ground and it was marked on a map, that's something. But we don't know the full extent. We don't know if it had been shrunk down inside for some size and some reason. I don't know. It could have been, with human remains being found out potentially outside here, but they were both disarticulated, this G and this D. Well, it's not quite where they are, right? The other map, I think there was one tooth or something was over here and one here in those later archaeological excavations. They were not part of an inhumation. They weren't part of a skeleton. They had been moved. They were like secondary or something. They may have been disturbed by the school, by the utilities that went in. I don't think finding one piece of human remain out here says that the burial ground extended this far, but it doesn't tell us that it didn't, right? It's all open. I think these are all, like I say, layers of information, layers of detail that we have to take together to say that this is an important site that should be honored and remembered and commemorated today.
Thank you. Alex, is there any questions that you see in the chat?
Yeah, there's a question in the chat. I think Kelly wanted to elaborate on a point that Tim just made about secondary deposits. And then Sue, you have a really good question. We'll get to that. And other folks are also welcome to put things in the chat.
First and foremost, I just want to echo Alex and Samantha's point. Tim, this was excellent. I'm so grateful for your expertise in being able not just to share the information, but to share the information in the way that you do. It just makes it so accessible, and grateful for you. The question, you sort of kind of answered it in your last points, but I just wanted to kind of tease it out a little bit. So in many ways, I want you to put more of your archaeology hat on rather than your geophysical hat on. And just talk a little bit maybe about how the primary deposits of burials is really what you would probably see in a GPR, if at all, right? Whereas a secondary deposit like that has been found would not necessarily show up. So if you, and we know, obviously, what's great about your all your data is it shows all the disturbance. It shows that these whoever might have been buried here may have been disturbed, most likely have been disturbed, right? So that primary deposit, whether it was in a casket, whether it was in a shroud, may no longer exist. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the loved ones that were buried there, as has been seen in other archaeological reports, and it's just disgusting, but that they are disarticulated. They're no longer in the full skeleton like you had stated before. So that, like you stated, you know, about your evidence question, I guess I just want you to talk a little bit more about that so that people could understand that human remains may still be found, but not necessarily in a primary deposit that you wouldn't think of as a burial ground. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think even in expressing that, I think you kind of get to the point as well
It's true.
anyway.
It's true.
That yeah, that
You're
mean,
not going to see that in GPR, essentially, is what I'm trying to say.
right. So even with the GPR, I mean, yes, if this was a shroud burial, I would be very pushed to see that there's not going to be the void that's often left from a casket or a coffin. Because even when that decomposes, you still get this airspace that sort of had been supported by a box, essentially. That can collapse over time, especially if it's under a road anyway. So that, like I say, not seeing anything doesn't immediately say, oh, none of these were casket burials. But a shroud burial is going to be more difficult to see because we're certainly not going to see a shroud. We're not going to see any textiles. We don't see bone with GPR. I think somebody has demonstrated that you can see skeletal remains with radar. They went down to Jamestown. This is actually the same company that manufactures this GPR. They were down at Jamestown and they went to an excavation of a cemetery, I think in the church where there are burials that are down there. And they're excavating down, they're an inch away from the burial, and then they're doing this very high, very small, high resolution, shallow GPR survey. And then it's more like an X-ray. I mean, you're an inch away from a burial. So then you can see bone because you've made it easier. You're much closer. Using radar as we do to look at typical inhumations from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet away, you never see the bone. Usually what I see is this sort of rectangular oblong reflections, or like I was showing these reflections down here that sort of stood out to me as like, that might be what I see. I think when I did the previous presentation, I included, because it was prior to doing the survey, I showed just sample data from another site. Maybe that would have been useful here, but you can refer to that other video to see that. Really all we're getting is this sort of rectangular or slightly oval reflection over either that airspace or it's that looser fill of the fill of the grave shaft. So that already would be secondary then to the burial, I would say, geophysically. And so even in a shroud burial or any other sort of similar situation, I could still potentially see the burial because of the grave shaft itself. And that I might be seeing more shallow anyway, because the grave shaft is going to go from the original ground surface down to whatever the depth of the inhumation. I'm not seeing even those here. We're obviously seeing a lot of other ground disturbances. So we know we are able to see cut and fill features to be very archaeological and again, clinical about it. Just not the burials. But so since we can't see bone, if there's been later disturbance that has impacted, disturbed, obliterated a burial, yeah, it's going to be even harder pushed to see anything from that. The fact that I'm seeing, a couple of utilities here, well, we know then this likely continues the full length of this road, so we can extend that down. In fact, some of these trends that I showed in the data over here, this was more difficult to really pick out in the data. Probably a continuation of a utility trench, if not the utility itself, and then maybe another one here. And it's likely that, yeah, since that continues all the way through here, well, we know we've basically got a slice of that burial ground that has been removed, disturbed. Oops, excuse me. Running right the way through. And even if I could detect the grave, the burial, whatever, an inhumation here, once it's disturbed, it's distributed, it's spread out, it's weaker. There's nothing to see. What I could see though are potentially what has disturbed it. Right, so we can maybe, maybe part of the extension of this basement here would explain why that disarticulated piece of human remain was found over here. And maybe actually was in this end of the trench, and maybe it was found simply because, yeah, somebody had dug out here. Maybe that just shows, yes, this did continue this far. Some of these human remains could have moved multiple times even. I mean, they could have been disturbed firstly by one school, and then a utility line, and then again, it's impossible to know. And that's the sadness. I mean, you're excavating and finding this bone or whatever and seeing the state that it's in. I mean, can you see, has it been broken prior to the later recovery? Yeah, I love this because it's human remains. These are people's ancestors and loved ones. It's hard to talk about.
Yeah.
It's not nice, but a lot of history is not nice, right? So
Right. Thank you,
and
Tim.
and
That's
all
what I want.
cemeteries are impacted. I mean, this is not this is also not limited to one group. When construction happens in cemeteries, nobody wants to find human remains, and if they do, I know that they're ignored. They're pretended that they're not seen because no one wants to hold up the next level of construction. So it can be indigenous, it can be black, white, it could be any group. Then they're not they're not always given the respect. Not always. Sometimes there's a lot of good a lot of good work is done, but a lot of cemeteries and certainly in cities that have been shown to have been even I think into the 80s. I mean, I know there's stories out here in Chicago. I'm sure they exist in New York. And I get told, oh, the cemetery, excuse me, the cemetery was moved, right? And it's now everyone was reinterred in this other cemetery. We can now dig here. The cemetery was moved, and this could be from like any time in the last 100 years. At best, maybe a sample of each individual was removed, maybe a long bone or a part of a skull or something. At worst, it's just the headstones. It's like, oh, well, the stones are removed, and people have, companies were paid money to remove the burials. And we know both from the work that I've done and from later excavation and construction that, oh, there's always surprises. These cemeteries are not moved in the way that we might expect that or interpret that to mean. It's the stones are moved, so it's removed from people's memory, and oh, we don't have to think about it anymore. And I don't know whether there was anything even approaching that with this, whether there was a formal removal or even an informal removal. It was
Yes.
removed.
Yes, it was. And I thank you, Tim, for that detailed explanation. I think it really points to the fact that we need to read between a lot of the lines in our documentation in the history and to really sort of tease out all forms of evidence, which is, what we do. Alex, I think you said there's another question, correct?
Yeah, we have one more. This is all really beautiful. Thanks, Tim. Sue had a really great question. Also, thank you for your enthusiasm in the chat. We also enjoy Tim, the archaeologist, you put it. Sue's question was, does rain affect your ability to scan through soil? Would you be able to scan after a recent storm?
It's a really good question, and especially with GPR. GPR is affected by the rain. That electromagnetic energy going into the ground, it's being conducted through the soil. And like I say, some of those metal plates on the surface give us this ringing because it's very, very conductive. So conductivity of soil, which is related to the water content, because that's what's conducting the water, does impact the data. Generally, I try and avoid doing a radar survey after a lot of very heavy rain, if it's been like very heavy for multiple days, because that will reduce potentially the contrast between what I'm looking for and then the natural, right? This comes back to what I said at the very beginning. These are all about anomalies. It's all what is different from the natural situation. If all of the natural and archaeological situation, cultural situation is all wet, then that's going to be difficult to tease apart. Sometimes that looser infill of whatever the pit is, whether it's a burial, it could be a foundation, a grave shaft, a well, a privy, whatever it is, that looser soil ends up draining faster than the natural. So you get this conductivity contrast. So sometimes rain can be helpful because if it's been dry for a very long period, then it can all be it can all equalize out that way. Um, it's more critical for electrical methods like that conductivity, the thing on the far right in that first picture I showed. But with radar, I've always tended to avoid it when it's extremely wet. But some rain I found to be helpful. I've actually done a couple of surveys where there was one survey in Rhode Island years ago where there had been some rain, and often in cultural resource management. So if I'm going in advance of a development, we don't have the luxury of time and choosing when to go out when conditions are optimal. And this was a cemetery alongside an airfield, an airport, I think, and they were talking about extending some buildings or something, and they wanted to make sure that graves didn't extend outside of the marked cemetery. So I happened to be there doing the cemetery survey and the area outside, while then an archaeological crew was coming in and putting in shovel tests, just these very small shovel-sized holes, just to kind of evaluate the area. I didn't see anything outside of the marked cemetery. But once they started digging, the ground was completely waterlogged. I could pick up soil and just wring out the water. It was so wet. Had I known that, I would have really argued not to have done the survey, because all my theory told me don't do GPR when the ground is this wet. But the GPR worked fine. So I'm like, huh, every project I do, there's something that surprises me or leaves me questioning, like, what is that? I've never seen that before. I wish people could dig after every project I do, because I learn from that. I'm informed. So again, very long-winded answer that the rain does impact GPR. I think if it's excessive, then yes, it can really negatively impact it. But in my experience, it's not been as bad as it might be. I don't like working in the rain, so I generally try and avoid that. Also, I find that when the ground is wet, even just from dew overnight in the morning, and once it's dried in the evening, or from one day to the next, you get differences in the data, and it's really nice to present a plot to people where there's this nice uniform map. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I just like to have a map. When the map has got like, oh, I can see, one day from the next, or you can see when I took 30 minutes to eat a sandwich and then I started again. I don't like that. I like to have a nice, clean image, and it's usually only on the very shallow time slices anyway. By the time you get into the ground, it isn't there. But I don't think in the experience I've had, I don't think I've ever seen a difference with, like, I started a survey and then it rained so much, but I had to keep going, that suddenly all these anomalies vanished because the ground got too wet. Um, so no, and I think we looked at the forecast. I think we were actually in a great a great situation here for the weather for this particular survey. I think it'd been quite dry. And the results also speak for themselves, right? The fact that we are seeing things easily down 5-6 feet, yeah, without question. That helps to increase our confidence in the value of the data.
It does, and I think I want to reiterate a point again. I know we have a few minutes left, so if there are any more questions, feel free to do the raise your hand feature or just send it and let me know. I do want to reiterate a point that you made earlier, and that Kelly also made, that even if we didn't get clear answers, I do think this makes a more compelling case to be able to lobby politicians or historic preservation organizations for, here's why we may not find things, but why this area is still worth the evidence of disturbances, explain why we're not finding things, but why this area is still worth commemorating or arguing for. I think the data was really valuable, so we appreciate it.
Yeah, we tried with the best, sort of most appropriate technology that we have. That it didn't work out isn't proof that there's nothing there or it's not important. And I think just the act of doing it and getting the community out, getting so many people involved, hopefully has also helped then lend support, right? Help generate this interest and show people care. This is important, not just because a few people say it is. It's an important site. It's remembered. So yeah. So I wish had been able to give you more. I take it personally when the results aren't good, but you can't guarantee this stuff. I've been doing it long enough to know that. And we went in, thankfully, a big part of my job is managing expectations, and I think maybe I overstressed that before the fact, but hopefully it didn't set this up for you all to think we're going to have this, this final map of everything.
I think as a coalition, and the descendant community, we are more proud of the fact that we were able to get you to come in and help with the questions that we have. And even though the report leads to additional questions, the fact that we have not been aware of this sacred site for generations, and the way we found out, which was during the pandemic, um, is just giving us more time to really find more information, educate ourselves. Um, because again, we as people who are in this country, and we're constantly learning more and more about who built and the contributions to individuals who made this country what it is, as we're about to celebrate, if you will, 250 years of its independence. And then we also are in a political time where history is being buried, is being, whitewashed, is being erased. This just adds to that. So when we step up and we fight, and we demand that we are seen, that we are valued, that we are acknowledged, this is just more evidence that this has just been the practice of erasing individuals, of not acknowledging. So um everything that you have done, this report, your work, has been extremely instrumental in us continuing our fight, and honoring those that voices have been um, silenced, and we're giving them that voice now. So we really truly thank you for that. And it also feeds us with what our next steps are, which I put in the chat that we are planning to do some community engagements with this new information, so that we can say, what should we do in regards to how we honor our ancestors? What should we do as to how we approach for funding and for political um, access? So I thank you very much. And I just see a plop. I'm not sure if that's a question in the chat.
Well, just quickly, you're welcome in here. I agree. This is history belongs to the people. It's not it's not one person and not one political party or anything like that. And
Exactly.
it needs to work at this ground level. So I really respect all the work you're doing, and it's an uphill struggle, I'm sure.
Yes.
And I want to add to this. I mean, this isn't necessarily the last geophysical work that could be done here. I mean, I've said there's no sort of new technology or anything else, but I know, even looking at this map, there are other areas there that overlap that could potentially be done. I mean, if I'm back in the area, I will be in touch, and we'll let you know about, potentially
Amazing.
doing some more. Someone just got in touch this week recently in Queens about a cemetery, so that's under a parking lot. So I'm like, okay, another one.
Yes.
Whether that will.
It's being uncovered as we're moving forward, that we're learning more and more of burial grounds that have been lost, that hasn't been acknowledged. So, it's a heartache, but then it's also a eye opener for us to continue moving forward. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, I should
Well,
put them in touch with you and all different folks. I think they can. There should be an even bigger coalition, right?
yeah, we're going to
Of
work
this.
on that. We're going to work on that, trying to make this a national, international coalition. So definitely.
Hmm.
Um, Thank you so much. I want to also acknowledge our other board members who weren't able to attend. Allison Martinez, Shauna Sabio, and Chantel Jones. We want to thank them, along with all of our interns and students who participated, especially the high school students. I will be telling them that when we come back from school next week, for all of their work as well in this amazing study. Kelly, Alex, is there any other closing remarks you want to make at this time?
Just a huge thank you to Tim and the community for coming out and doing this. Thank you.
Absolutely.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone. It is now 1:58. Enjoy your Saturday. But as we end, we want to just ground ourselves again. Whatever expectations that we may have brought into this workshop or into this presentation, I hope that it gave you some kind of understanding and opportunities to think about what the possibilities are moving forward. And we look forward to your feedback. Please follow us on Instagram as well as our website, Flatbush African Burial Ground Coalition.org. And our Instagram handle is Flatbush. I want to make sure that I have it correctly. FABGC, so FABG Coalition. We're always putting up new information and updates of upcoming events, and we look forward to seeing you all at our next event. Thank you. Have a safe and wonderful holiday. And for all of my Caribbean folks, I look forward to seeing you on the Parkway, celebrating our culture. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.